Fairway Lakes Office Park Street Lighting. Our operations manager has requested an action that the CDD take over the responsibility for those. Would you please give us your logic?
Well, this was a little bit of a pickle for me to research, and apparently we had invested some money in fixing the lights, and that was discussed at a board meeting. And that was like $3,300 that we invested to fix them. And then I guess what happened was there was some conversation with the previous operations manager, and they were in the process of getting it transferred over to FP&L on our account, and that never got done. And then I believe it was Mr. Tickle, the HOA president, basically told FP&L that they wanted it off of their account, so they were going to turn the lights off after we made the investment. So in a pinch, I signed the form and said, well, let's put that in the district's name, and I will make sure that it goes back to the board so we can get some direction on what the final issue is. And I think we were still out on legal opinion on how we were going to handle that, or is this our responsibility? Some of the correspondence said it looks like it was initially set up and intended for them to be on our bill.
Yeah, I mean, once again, dealing with FPL and the record keeping is always a treat, because after 7 years, they usually destroy everything. So even going back further than 7 years from now, you're not going to find anything from FPL.
It's been wrong most of the time anyway.
That's correct. I mean, it's always been interesting with them. I mean, we've had that experience with them in disputes and litigation, mediation, arbitration issues over who pays the light bill in communities in Lee and Cuyahoga County. So it's always interesting dealing with FPL. That being said, with regards to I believe there's a utility, these are probably located in the utility easement or the road right of way. I'm not sure the exact location. Scott had a map of them, I believe. For the standpoint of clarity of ownership of the lights, are they leased from FPL or are they owned by the association? I'm not even sure we have that clear yet.
Sure.
That's part of the analysis we need to perform. If it's owned by if it's owned by FPL and quote unquote leased, it's one issue. Then district can enter into that lease. If it's owned by WCI, is the original developer of Fairway Lakes, then we may need a bill of sale from WCI. The district wants to take those over. And if it's owned by the Fairway Lakes Master Association, I'll call it, we would need a bill of sale from one of the last directors of that corporation. And the district can specially assess, if they wish to, just that Fairway Lakes area for the cost associated with the streetlights, operation and maintenance.
Are you finished?
Yes, sir.
For now? Please.
This topic, I expressed myself before. That is not a main thoroughfare, it's an office park. Mm-hmm. And I drove, prior to the meeting, I drove through it again. And it's just office after office after office after office. And my question was, first of all, are those office condos? Okay. Having said that, as most everybody kind of knows, real estate is kind of near and dear to me. In those situations, I have never known of a public utility that took on the responsibility for those items in an office park. And the office park was solely responsible for them, and the office park was solely responsible to pay the light bill, not the residents of Gateway in any way, shape, or form. That's an office complex. And every one of the tenants, typically in a commercial lease, triple net, pays for those items, including the taking care of the exterior of the buildings, the roof, the taxes, fair portion, etc. So for us to take on another obligation, once again, means more staff time, more personnel, more of an obligation, more of a commitment for something that we should not take on in any way, shape, or form. It's theirs, and if someone said when I mentioned this before, but they won't have lights. Trust me, they will. The moment they can't do business at night, they'll find a way. The moment that we are the charity and we bill all the rest of the people in their annual assessment that are residents of Gateway, they won't. So it's time that we simply say it's yours. Enough.
Right.
Thank you. I've got a point of view on this, that, just quick review, the WCI were the POA, and then they wound it up, so there isn't a POA. And to my knowledge, Tony, we still haven't determined who owns that road.
The road was dedicated to the, in the plat, it was dedicated to the Fairway Lakes Drive Property Owners Association, which has been dissolved, which was administratively dissolved.
So who owns the road today?
That entity which was administratively dissolved.
Okay, so who owns it today? If there's an accident, who's liable?
Successors and assigns.
In my opinion, the district doesn't have an interest except as an easement holder for utilities and drainage within
Okay.
that road right of way.
And I know that we've been working on this for some time, and I know that Mr. Caldwell came to us at the end of 14 and asked us out of the goodness of our hearts if we'd accept 6 minor roads, and we did. And I thought it was the right thing to do, and I still do. I don't feel comfortable picking up the tab for the lights until we've determined what we're gonna do with the road. We shouldn't be lighting a road that we don't know who owns it. And I'm kinda leaning towards Gary's point of view too, but I think we have to figure out what we're gonna do about that road, if we're gonna do anything at all, before I'm happy to vote on who's paying for the lights.
Yeah, one of the questions that needs to be determined, in my opinion, as to that roadway segment, and it's an engineering question, whether or not that road was built to Lee County standards for public roads. And if not, then you may not want to take that road.
Could you clarify what you just said, please?
Lee County has different standards for, I'll call them, not district roads, it's purely private roads, purely private roads than public roads.
Yeah, and
Correct?
I would guess, given the age of it, that, I mean, you would have to core it to know, for sure. You could go back and look at design drawings, but until you core it, you wouldn't know for sure. But I doubt it's built to any standards.
To any county standards.
That exists today, correct?
Or at the time, possibly.
Possibly even at the time.
Okay, I remember we were discussing 6 minor roads at the time. I think that's what we decided to
Yes.
accept. And was this a 7th that kind of was left in limbo?
Yes.
Is that where we were? And as far as I see, it's still in limbo.
Yes.
And, I think we have to figure out what we're gonna do about that before we start talking about who's paying for the lighting bill.
Now,
Margaret, please.
I agree with what Rod just said. Now, also Fairway Lakes, just part of our budgeting process, I pulled up a budget, it says there's 90 total units. Are those individually owned, or does one person own this office park? Do we even know that?
I've not checked the separate parcel ownership, sir.
You think there are separate?
I know I've not checked to see. I
Okay.
can try to check quickly.
Because if there are separate parcel ownerships, then as far as maintaining the road and maintaining the lighting, if they're paying into the 001 budget, then at budget time, we should look into them paying a little bit more to cover the expenses for these items.
Right, I think that's been part of the past discussion, have a special assessment if there's a determination made that the only properties that benefit are those as opposed to any other properties within Gateway that benefit from those services or infrastructure.
So at this time, we're just voting on the lights and who should pay the bill. But we do not own the road at this time.
That's correct.
And I do agree with Gary that at this time, that the businesses or business entity who owns the building, or as many as people would own the building, would be responsible for the safety and well-being of their property.
Yeah, there's a
Hey.
restaurant in there too. Did anybody here even know that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
and you better believe that restaurant is going to want to have lights for their evening clientele.
I think there is, Mr. Chairman, I'll just, let me say something.
Please continue.
I was gonna say, that, we can't, as a responsible district, we're trying to upgrade the look and feel of our landscape and our roads. And We're turning the roads over, they're all looking in great shape, and soon will be all looking in great shape, including the 6 minor roads. And it just doesn't seem right that we sit on our hands and let this situation fester, saying it's not our problem. You know, if the road deteriorates and there's no lights, we've kind of got a little bit of a ghetto going on there. And it's a question of what proactively can we do to bring it to a head and take some action.
I think a couple things might be, one, I just noticed, I guess OAK, Owen Ames Kimball Company has their offices over there, I guess. they
They're
are.
a big construction company.
Right, and Steve Shemp, is he still involved with OAK?
I don't know, it's been a long time.
Because he was on this board a long time ago and a very responsible individual, a very well-respected individual. I think approaching OAK and say, guys, do you all know what's really going on? And maybe they could help also lead the charge. And the alternative would be a letter to the property owners saying, listen, we the district have gratuitously entered into an agreement with FPL to fund this for 6 months. After 6 months, it's gone.
Right.
So you all need to develop an action plan as to your maintenance, your
That's a good
operation of the
idea.
streetlights. But I think a knock on the door of OAK and talking to those folks would be in order also.
Yeah, and I think if that's what the direction the board gives, 6 months, and then you're gonna turn out the lights, we'll get with the property owners and Tony and figure out what's the next best step.
Including
It's probably,
ownership.
right, yeah, well, they're gonna have it, and they're gonna have to take ownership. The board doesn't sound like they want to accept.
I don't
You
think we
got
want to
that one right.
rebuild that road.
Yeah, but you can't, I'm sorry.
I don't think we want to rebuild the road.
No,
No,
but
no,
you're saying they've got to have it, we can't force them to take it.
Right.
So
Well,
that-
but and from the perspective of the district, the statute says the district has the ability to acquire, own, and maintain district roads equal to or exceeding the applicable specifications of the county in which such district roads are located. So that's why I was asking the question of Danny, if they meet Lee County's standards for public roads or not. And if they don't, then district may not be in a
Yeah,
position to
but
take those
the
roads.
ownership doesn't sound like an option. So what we would look at is resurrecting the POA for that area and have them pick it up. There is an existing POA, it's just
dissolved.
defunct.
Well, it was administratively dissolved, and whether or not they then need the joinder of all the individual owners, that's their issue to resolve. I mean,
Tony, members of the board, why don't we just ask our operations manager to get hold of OAK, big construction firm there, and tell them of the dilemma, not our dilemma, the dilemma, and tell them they've got 6 months and they need to get their act together.
Also got a property management company over there that handles an awful lot of the HOAs in Gateway.
Okay, well,
Owned by a lady, and quite a sharp lady.
is that
I've
Max
talked to
Management
her.
Properties?
Yeah.
Okay.
would that be satisfactory, April? Okay, let's go on to the next, Pelican Reserve Repair Entry Monument Trellis on
So
the Green
does that-
Line. Nobody wanted to really talk about that one, but I'm
Let me
sorry.
just ask the question then, are we then being asked to approve the payment of this, the
You-
street lighting for 6 months?
For 6 months, yes.
That's what you're requesting that we do?
So are we gonna establish a date certain for beginning and end?
Sure.
I think we should.
I think you may want to have an action item on each board meeting as to the status dealing with the Fairway Lakes folks.
How about for the remainder of this fiscal year, which is 6 months, end of fiscal year 2016, they'll be turned
Number
off if
one.
there's not, or turned over.
So that sounds fine.
Is
to
that
me.
good?
Yeah.
Everybody good with that?
Sure.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure we knew
Thank
what we
you.
No,
were
that's good.
voting on.
That's good. That's a good number. So,
Well,
yeah,
we're talking about
what you need to
production.
draft something that shows that number that you can communicate to those two different parties so that they know the date.
Well, the repair of the lights was,
We've already done that.
Yeah. that-
$3,000.
That's past tense.
Yep.
So I'm just saying when the lights go out.
Yeah, so
September
you're
30th.
looking at about $250, $260 that
Yeah.
you're committing to.
Okay.
We know what we want, you know
But-
what we want.
Yes, sir.
I still want to ask just one more question, and that is, and if we do that, and gosh forbid, somebody hits a light pole,
Don't even go there.
I'm sorry, let's close our eyes.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
I so moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Motion
Understand
is
what you're
second to approve the consent agenda as amended with item E. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? 5-0.
Except 4D, Bill, does 4D and the $14,000 gonna get approved? Is that
Yes.
We're approving that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, item 5, discussion items. Revise the insurance waiting period is recommended for ACA compliance. There was a multi-page information on that, but I'm going to ask April if she would just quickly review that ACA regulations so that the people who are watching and those in the audience can understand what it is we're working on.
Okay, are we talking about the,
5A, the
90
ACA
days to
compliance.
60.
60 days, the 90 days, okay. When we met with our agent to do our insurance renewal, he brought to our attention that there's some new rules with the Affordable Care Act, and he has already been managing his clients to comply with this new rule. 90 days is a real popular probationary period, and it's kind of put us in a pickle, if you would, because if we enforce our 90-day probationary period and we start on that 90th day, we could be into a month, and we're gonna end up paying insurance for a full month and not have the benefit effective for the full month. So that was probably the reason why our policy is that the insurance is effective at the first of a month. But if we switch to the 60-day, we're giving a little bit on the insurance benefit, and it's a little earlier, but we should be in full compliance. And he's, our agents, because they want their clients to comply with this law, that's how it's been administered. So it's really just a technicality.
Housekeeping item, really.
Yes, a
Questions by the board
technicality.
members? Yeah.
I'm confused.
Yes,
On page 108, it very clearly states at the beginning of the data, 90-day waiting period limit.
right.
So you gave us this thing that our insurance carrier wants us to cut it back to 60, but then the information you gave us says that the standard is 90.
And the rule is 90, but our policy says we have a 90-day probationary period, and that our insurance benefit kicks in on the first day of the following month. So we could actually exceed that 90-day max. That's the law.
So if a new person came to work in the middle of the month, and we applied 90 days, by the time their
That following
insurance
month.
came into effect, we'd be in violation.
Right.
No?
I'm not,
No
again,
complaint?
you give us a document that very specifically says 90 days is the standard, and I went through it, and it keeps 90 days, 90 days, it keeps repeating it.
Right.
Are we
That
talking about the fact that the 91st day suddenly becomes our risk factor?
the 90, we could maintain our policy, and we could have the benefit effective the 91st day, and we could be in compliance, but we'll end up paying insurance a lot of times for a full month that we're not getting the full month benefit from. So it's a trade-off. Do we want to pay money for nothing because we're not getting the employee enrolled, or do we want to just back off a little bit of the 90-day probationary period for the insurance benefit and comply, and always make sure that we're complying with the law?
The item which may be a little unclear is the insurance premiums and coverage always begin on the first of a month.
Yeah.
Okay.
But still, having said that, if it begins on the first of the month, then
And we want to apply 90 days. do you think
Correct.
We could be in violation.
no.
Oh.
According to this, we would be following the ACA's 90-day waiting period that they put down, and it says here, it took effect January 1st, 2014. I went
Right,
through this
the
lengthy
law is
brochure.
the law says we can't exceed 90 days.
Well, then we won't.
But we
You can't
possibly
always
could.
hire someone
On
on
the
the
first of the
first
month.
of the month.
All right.
So
then
if you
can't we
don't
have-
hire them on the first, say you hired them on the 15th, then we end up after exceeding the 90 days, and then we pay a full month before they can use
So
the
in other words, you're
benefits.
saying we're not paying per diem, Pam?
We're
You know,
paying,
We
No.
hire them on the 15th, we give them their insurance on the 91st day, which is the 16th, hypothetical 30-day months, yada, 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 continuum. And
All
doing that,
insurance starts on the first of the month.
so they will always start the premium on the first of the month?
There's no interim billing with the
Shame on
insurance.
them.
We'd have to pay for the full month.
Been that way forever.
So if we
You're right.
start someone on the insurance policy on the 15th of the month, the following month, we will receive a bill for 2 full months. The next month and the previous month for the full month.
Is every insurance company this way? If they aren't,
I-
I'd fire
I-
this guy in a horse.
No, they are all.
It's not this guy. This is Blue Cross.
They're all that way, Gary.
Then I'd fire Blue Cross.
And Blue Shield.
Whatever his name is.
Uh, April, we have this under a discussion item, and we certainly needed the discussion. But when the new employee handbook is revised, and I know that's being worked on, we need to be sure that that is included. Correct?
Yes, yes. And I provided the one simple revision, and it's literally just the number that's being struck out for this revision.
Would you discuss with us the approval of the insurance renewal effective May 1st?
Diane and I sat with our agent, and he brought to us a proposal. Unfortunately, the same benefit package that we have had is no longer available. So we had to consider they have a plan that has the same number, but the benefits schedule in it changed slightly. And so we looked at that, and that was going to cost a little more money. And then we looked at his alternative option, which was the biggest cost-saving feature of the plan that we want to adopt is the fact that we're moving from an in-network, out-of-network program to just an in-network. We have 10 employees on the program, 12 employees on the program. And right now, we all got together, we reviewed the changes, we addressed the savings to the district on, how we were going to, what we wanted to present to you guys as far as an additional cost or a savings, and everybody was in agreement that we would go for the in-network only plan, even though the prescriptions are a little bit more expensive. It does switch us to a copay schedule, which was fairly positive, received positively by most people. And then the
The family on deductible.
yeah, the deductible was the same for our employees. It's just a larger deductible on the family side, which we don't have. So that didn't bother anybody. And we did decide that because we have been having our team meetings and everybody's aware of the supervisors wanting everybody to be held accountable, and we need to change our evaluation process. And that was when I suggested to them that we would ask if the savings could be deferred in 2017 to training and professional development.
I'd like to commend you. In all the years I was working, I was unable to get 100% agreement from my employees.
I was very proud of them as well.
I think we ought to have a motion to approve this, but before, I'd like to ask the members for comments and questions.
Thank you. I think you've done a good job there getting this premium down, considering you're moving to copay from co-insurance, which usually sends it the other way. And in network is obviously the reason why you've been able to get this savings at $10,000.
Mhm.
And I'm all in favour of putting that to professional development.
Diane does most of the footwork. She did a really good job of pulling this stuff
And
together.
I'm all in favour of putting that into professional development. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments? Questions?
I only have one. Do we need to, do you want to approve all the discussion items at once, or should we
I
approve
wanna
A
do, I wanna
before we
approve,
do B?
I wanna do this one separately, if you don't mind.
Okay. So should we do A first?
Well, we've already decided that that's gonna be changed in the handbook that's being worked on, which we will, get to approve, in a
In
future
total?
time. Yeah.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
So-
Yeah.
May I have a motion to approve the insurance renewal as it's just been described?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? 5-0. Thank you very much. What's the name of this?
Pistachio.
Pistachio. Pistachio plan and plat approval. Danny, are you gonna help us through this misnomer?
Yes, for the record, Danny Nelson with Tetra Tech, District Engineer. The last board meeting, Tyler had presented this, and the board had asked, there were some questions about boundary and DRI, so the board had asked for us to come back and make some clarifications on those boundary issues and the separation between Gateway and Pelican Preserve. So Tyler's put together this memo that you see, and along with that has some boundary information, DRI information. Tony had talked about some of this earlier. So essentially, at the end of the day, the Pistoia area is completely separated from Gateway. Residents will actually border Gateway Boulevard, but they will not have access to Gateway Boulevard. And as it sits right now with what has been proposed, there would be a berm separating Gateway from Pelican, no access. So I know there's been discussion about, in fact, earlier today even, about the possibility of changing the berm, or even on top of the berm, of adding a wall. And I think both sides of the area would like to see that. So other than that potential change, I don't know if you have any questions specifically about what Tyler put together for clarification.
Question?
No, just comment. Yeah, we want a wall.
What was your comment?
We want a wall.
Okay. I've got a comment that was touched on a little earlier, Danny, and that is, I just want to get into this Arborwood just because I spent quite a bit of time with you and Dan, and you and Tyler on this already, so I'm up to speed. But the Arborwood, phase 3, Arborwood, presumably there's an Arborwood phase 1 and 2, which is part of an Arborwood DRI, okay? Can you tell me why Arborwood is not part of the Arborwood DRI? Why is it Gateway?
That would probably be a better question for Mr. Caldwell. To me, it's an odd duckling how it's laid out, and it could easily be a better fit with Gateway if it was part of Gateway Greens.
Correct, that's
And
where I'm coming from.
if that was accessed through Gateway Greens Boulevard, it would be a much better. But as it sits today, and I have not seen anything designed or anything conceptual, but as it sits today, to the best of my knowledge, the only way that as it's will be laid out that they'll be able to access is to leave the boundary of Gateway
Yes.
and to enter the boundary of Arborwood, and then either go whichever way, either stay on Commerce Lakes and then exit, or to enter back into Gateway Boulevard. But as it sits, it's kind of a goofy little odd duckling.
Yeah, so Arborwood phase 1 and 2 is part of the Arborwood DRI, and Arborwood phase 3 is part of the Gateway DRI,
Correct.
but all 3 phases have their own, a part of Arborwood CDD.
I would.
Is that how it works?
Arborwood
No.
Phase 3 is not an Arborwood CDD.
So what's gonna happen to that?
It is in Gateway's CDD, so unless
Okay.
that were to be removed, which
Okay.
would probably be a very difficult task.
So we're supplying utilities then to our board phase
We'll be
three?
providing utilities,
Okay.
yes. I have not personally, maybe Tyler has seen, but I personally have not seen any conceptual plans for how they envision, the homes being built and the interaction for residents to come and go. But again, I say it would be a much more fluid part of Gateway if it was an extension of Gateway Greens. It's just everything I've seen, that's not gonna happen.
No, it couldn't happen without the majority vote of the Gateway Greens residents anyway.
Correct.
Do the board members wish to have any conversation with Mr. Caldwell, who's sitting here?
I would. I would like to.
Patiently.
David, would you please come to the podium?
Be happy to, Mr. Chairman.
I believe Mr. Senior has a question for you.
Hi, David.
Well, Dave Caldwell, WCI for the record, if there's a tape recorder going. Mr.
Do you
Senior.
want to talk or do you want me to ask a question?
Well, maybe let me sort of address some of the questions I'm hearing that you were trying to have Danny answer. Several things. Pistoia is definitely part of the Pelican Preserve DRI and the planned unit development that the city of Fort Myers has. It's within the city of Fort Myers. As to Mr. Neubauer's question about whether there's a berm, a wall, a fence, whatever, that was all addressed in the DRI notice of proposed change when we brought in that portion of Prato and Pistoia back into the city for the second or third time. I've lost count. But in the last iteration, that was a requirement that the city council put on us to put a combination of either a berm, a fence, a wall, whatever, but that's already been dealt with as a requirement to put that along the easterly boundary of what would be Pelican Preserve. So if I could, I'll go over to that map and sort of just point generally. This is the Prato area. Pistoia is the area you're considering now. So we have an obligation to do perimeter, landscape, berm, fence, wall along there, all the
Problem
residential
is,
areas.
David, we can't see a thing you're doing. But if you went to that map on that wall,
Well, I'll point to there, sir.
There you go.
Right there, okay? Mr. Senior's question on the Arborwood Phase 3 is a logical question. It does seem like an odd man out, and as a piece of residential development for the company, we own it, always have. It was created in that fashion because I think you're all aware the county has in its master, and I'm probably using the wrong word, but the transportation plan for the greater Lee County area, they want a connection, a collector road between Gateway Boulevard and Plantation Gardens Parkway. And part of the Pelican Preserve DRI approvals that we got with the city require us to reserve a 100-foot right-of-way for that connection between Gateway Boulevard and where Arborwood DRI at the south there.
Can I go back to another one?
No, hopefully everyone knows where the Arborwood is. Arborwood line is right there. That's the Arborwood boundary. So the 120-foot collector has to go in that corridor, and that set the boundary for Pelican Preserve and Gateway. The right-of-way that we're required to set aside is within the city limits of Fort Myers and part of the Pelican Preserve DRI. So that left a piece of land that we own on the outside of Pelican Preserve, but still in the Gateway PUD, still in the county. And what were we going to do with it? We didn't have a grand plan until all of a sudden the opportunity to purchase some property in the Arborwood DRI came along. And we purchased that about a year and a half ago, and we're now calling that the Arborwood Preserve Community. That's totally within the Arborwood DRI. It's totally within the city of Fort Myers, totally served by the city of Fort Myers utilities. It's going to be a 100% residential community, not age restricted. We're open for sales right now, and hope to have some homes for delivery later this year. In the grand strategy at WCI, we were trying to think, what do we do with this piece of land? Now everyone knows is Arborwood Phase 3. What do we do with it? Someone's suggesting making it part of Gateway Greens. That'd be nice, except there's no physical connection without going through golf course maintenance property. They own that chunk of land that's between the residential areas of Gateway Greens and what is Arborwood Phase 3. So there's not a convenient connection through Gateway. We realize it seems odd that we have a piece of land that we're trying to make part of Arborwood. It's in a different governmental jurisdiction. It's in a different district, but heavens, that didn't stop us with Pelican Preserve, and we made that work, I think. So we're not there yet. It will have internal access through Arborwood, our Arborwood Preserve to the south, and that's how residents in the event we get to the development up there, how that would work.
Would you go back to the map for a second, please, David? And with your finger, show me how the new residents of Arborwood 3 are going to exit their homes onto a arterial highway.
Well, this piece down here is Arborwood Preserve that we bought.
Okay.
So we have a residential development. That's neat. We own all of this.
Okay.
And this is just a typical subdivision layout with all kinds of homes and roads and whatever. So the Phase 3 area up in this zone will have a road connection that would come through the residential here. It's just sort of more residential neighborhoods.
Okay, so there's not gonna be a direct exit to either Gateway Boulevard or Pelican Preserve Boulevard, is that so?
No, none of these, unless they go, nothing connected into Pelican Preserve, nothing connected into Gateway.
So the answer to Bill's question is that residents of Arborwood Phase 3 will get onto Daniels Parkway by going all the way through the Arborwood community.
Correct. Yeah.
Rather like Pistoia, the only way they can get out is through tree line.
Correct.
Further questions from Mr. Caldwell?
I do have a question, David. And I just want to make sure you'd finished your presentation before I ask it.
Well, that wasn't really a presentation other than to try and address your questions. So if you have other questions, I'd be happy to try and address them.
Yes, Pistoia. I asked this question not only in response to Ed Tinkle's comments at the outset of this meeting, but also because I've been here a long time in Gateway, and I'm very close to the golf club and the needs and wants of the golf club at Gateway. I've had a lot of phone calls on this, and here's what I want to say. I'm not as good a golfer as Ed Tinkle is, but I'm kind of a hacker. But I do enjoy the 13th hole. It's one of the nicest and most serene and peaceful holes on Gateway Golf Course. That's the one that Pistoia goes down along the 13th hole. It's a lovely, peaceful part of the course. I've heard what Ed said today, and he reflects the comments I've heard from quite a few people at the club. They're concerned about the future development there, as well as the the red line, which is effectively a potential road that's gonna connect to Gateway Boulevard, right? And Ed's comment is what I'm hearing, that they're worried about noise, they want some privacy if possible on the golf course. And they're worried about people getting on the golf course. You know, because there's no water separating like there is on the 12th hole down the Boggle. There's no water preventing people getting on.
You're speaking of intruders.
Well, intruders is an even better word. I'm just wanting to find out from your point of view, is there anything can be done, and I realise DOT are involved in the potential decision here with this road, but are WCI willing to entertain some thoughts on putting what Ed mentioned earlier, some kind of a berm or even a wall or something that's going to maintain the privacy and serenity of that 13th hole? Or is there anything, what's in your mind?
I understand your question. The fence and wall and landscaping that I mentioned earlier is along the interface of what would be the residential areas of Pelican Preserve and this proposed right-of-way to the county. So that's on the, so what you'd end up having is the golf course, then the eastern boundary of the road right-of-way, the western boundary that interfaces with Pistoia and Prado. That western boundary of the right-of-way with Pistoia and Prado is where the wall fence is, a residential boundary between the road, sort of the same thing, except it applies to the Pelican Preserve side.
That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing Gary talk about a wall, I'm hearing Ed talk about a wall, but it's which side of the road the wall is at.
Well, our requirements under the DRI with the city is to put it on the westerly side. That doesn't satisfy what I guess you would want from a Gateway Greens and the golf club side. You know, there's no near-term development of that road that we know of. It has to be something that the county commissioners deem to be needed, put it on their 5-year capital program for a road. At that point, that's, I think, when the parties start to get energized, whether they're on the Pelican Reserve side, the Gateway side, and start to input what they expect of the county to do. You know, there's no requirement for WCI to construct this road. All we have to do is reserve the right-of-way for them, so in the event they want that for a road connection, it's held, you know, it's there.
So you don't see there's any WCI input here, even if the DOT said, yeah, we're okay with WCI putting up a wall on the easterly side, you're saying you wouldn't do it anyway?
Well, I don't, you know, it's nice to always have someone else pay for stuff. If the club is concerned about privacy, it seems the club ought to be dealing with it.
Well, the club is not the club who's building the community or the road.
Well, understand, but they always had a neighbor to the west. You know, so to think that that day was never going to come for development is probably short-sighted.
When you mention a berm and a wall combination, could you give me a little bit of idea?
It hasn't been designed, sir. We're planning on a fence, probably one of those aluminum type picket fence on top of a berm with some landscaping, but the actual design is not, it's still in the works.
So your plan is to build a berm or a wall on for the interests of Pelican Preserve?
Because we're required to, under the DRI with the city.
I see.
But, David, you know darn well that the residents of Pelican Preserve are very concerned regarding what it's going to be. And I know that in your defense and of your defense, that it hasn't been designed. But there's no idea, and knowing how much the emotion is regarding this, wouldn't it be simpler to create something that would Make people rest easy?
Well, as I think I said moments ago, it's being designed now.
When will we be able to see it?
I don't have a date. I don't get involved in those particular things.
2 weeks, 2 months?
Probably it's months out. You know, these kind of things, they go through a design process, they get costed out, we find out it's too expensive or it's not available, we rework it to what is acceptable. So I think it's a couple of months out. Mainly because we have to start doing it with part of Prato, and that's under construction right now.
So it'd be obviously easier for me to give you some type of commitment of my vote than 2 months from now than it would be to be what I will say is short-sighted by saying, sure, go ahead. You know the amount of emotion that's there.
I think we've done and responded to the needs of the community. I'm putting in fences and landscaping and whatever in different forms and fashions around the community. And we are required to address it for this eastern boundary of Pelican Preserve. To suggest that I can turn it around in 2 weeks, it's not even something in my control, sir.
Okay, but then you said 2 months.
I don't know what the time frame is. When you spring questions on me at times like this, I don't think that's necessarily a fair way to, to get an honest and really a realistic response.
Okay, my comeback to you with my obvious feel of your blood pressure rising is, I don't think that you find this a surprise that you're gonna be asked that question. I mean, it isn't like you and I don't know each other for a few years, David, and like this hasn't been an issue that's been on the table, so.
David, I'm talking about being good community citizens here, and I want to reflect on what happened a year ago, 18 months ago, when there was a letter sent to us by, I wasn't on the board then, about taking these live oaks down on Gateway Boulevard, okay? And that caused a lot of controversy. And at that time, I contacted your CEO, Keith Bass, who was very sympathetic with the residents' cause, felt that I was trying to make the point that there's been part of our character for a long time. What can WCI do to try and assist rather than coming in with the chainsaws, which was under threat at that time? And what it all resulted in the end with a nice letter from David Loveland saying that they have a complete streets policy and they're going to be grandfathered. And I'm sure that your chairman had quite a bit to do with that, although that probably has never been made public. And I thank you as a company for that. And it's the same spirit that I'm here representing. I know that Gary's very passionate about what goes on the Pelican Preserve side, and understandably so. But we also have the same concerns on the Gateway Golf Course side. That there's some privacy from intruders, noise. I'm sure the reason for a wall on one side is just as fervently the same for a wall on the other side, or not necessarily a wall. I realise that's probably going to cost you six serious figures, but maybe some kind of Isn't there something that you could do if the DOT were okay with it, to put something on the golf course side of that potential road for us as a responsible developer, to protect what Westinghouse and WCI created, which was the golf course?
It's the kind of I'm not going.
I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm saying I'd rather defer it than put you on the spot today.
And I can't answer it. I would rather defer this whole issue because it's a costly item. I don't think it's WCI's problem. You'd like to make it WCI's problem, that I understand. But I don't understand why it all of a sudden is something on my plate.
If this was deferred...
There was never a fence around the Gateway Golf Club. it has happened over the years that someone other than WCI has put some fences around the golf club. So, you know,
I reflect on the whole par three, when, and I'm going back to the late nineties now, where you put the Grand, which has now got a different name. Those apartments there next to the par three, the hole number 3.
oh,
You know what I
okay.
mean? What do they call those now, those? Royal Green. Yeah, I thought that was an eyesore, and I still do. And the golf club has had to put a fence around there because of the problems that ensued. And I'm not sure it's up to the golf club to keep fencing itself off from developments. Now, and this is not your road, I understand the DOT is gonna get involved in this. I'm trying to represent residents' needs and wants right here. And if we need, I'd rather defer it than put you on the spot. Let's talk a bit more about it. If anything can be done, I'd like to get it done.
You can offer a motion to defer?
I would, but I want to know what's going to be the result of deferring it. How urgent is this vote needed?
I think the issue, you know, I'm not going to make any commitments as to this fence that you're suggesting along the eastern line. That's, you know, that's something I have to take back to management, and they'll weigh in on this.
Please do, and I don't want to be unfair to you. If this can be deferred reasonably until this discussion's been had, I would prefer to do that. That's my thought.
Are you gonna offer a motion to defer?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Oh, yes.
Any further conversation? Are we gonna, have a date certain on this
Well,
motion
you
to
know-
defer, or until, I'm sorry, excuse me?
Well, how long is this going to take? Because these are, the issue that you're talking about could be quite lengthy on trying to get,
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I think David is, we know David. David's a very efficient man.
We're gonna defer this until the next board meeting?
How about we defer it till, because
How about
he
4
came
weeks?
back to me very
Yes.
succinctly, and I respect that. So how about we make it the first meeting in,
Yeah, 4 weeks today.
May,
Yeah.
4 weeks?
I'll go with that.
So that's your motion,
That
that's
is.
your second.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
yes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
5-0. Thank you, David.
Okay.
Good luck.
Pistoia is part of Pelican Preserve. Why do you want to wall it off from Pelican Preserve?
The road.
The road from the
sure,
golf
the
course.
road's gonna go right along the golf
And he's
course.
got, and there's other wall and fence issues.
Yeah.
Mr.
And
Chairman,
we've
Mr.
also
Tinkle
had-
wants to word.
We, HOA and club, have talked to the county commissioners, David Loveland and
Yeah.
Ed Tinkle again. We talked to the county commissioners, we talked to David Loveland, and we've talked to Randy Searchy. They'll have no part of being involved with a fence, berm, or anything else. They say it's gotta be worked with the developer.
Yeah.
So it's either gonna happen through the developer, it's not gonna happen at all.
Thank you. Item 5D on our agenda is the proposed fiscal 17 budget schedule. And I don't know exactly who proposed this schedule, but I'm thinking possibly Mr.
Stephen,
Bloom
is
had
this you?
something to do with it. Would you please come to the podium, Steve, and identify yourself
Can we
and
first
just
beat
run
him up,
through
though?
this?
We need to beat him up a little bit.
Well, that's why I'm standing up, so you.
Well, why did you do this to Pelican Preserve, Stephen? Why did you do that?
Well, Stephen Bloom, so I'm sure everybody knows who. Severn Trent. This is just kind of following the same process we did last year, just to get some dates in here. We can move this around however we need to. The core of what I wanted to make sure we had some guidelines on were the workshops for the board, so that, you know, between the time that we present a preliminary draft, there is enough time to schedule the workshops to go over, you know, each individual fund or the whole budget including capital plan and staffing plan and anything else. So to do that, I kind of had to make the first couple steps very, very concise. So just to make sure, but really what, my goal is to get together and get some kind of preliminary draft for the board to look at. The first draft is just going to be what it sounds like, very preliminary, and will certainly change as the process goes through. This is just kind of an outline of what we've been following to kind of get to those steps so that we do have the time for the workshops.
So it starts on the 4th. Today's the 7th. Has this been implemented?
The templates were sent out yesterday, last night.
Okay. Do you foresee by the 11th that staff's going to provide feedback?
I think staff would probably like more time to provide feedback, but
Staff always likes more time.
yes, I would think that they would probably like more time, but again, what we would be putting together would be very preliminary, that staff would still have the time throughout the process to do this. Because remember, when we get to the workshops, we go fund by fund and look at each one of them.
So what would you say would be accomplished by next meeting in your heart?
Next meeting being
The 21st?
21st, I'm going to have a preliminary draft for the board. It
Okay.
might not include everything that staff is looking for yet, which is fine. That really doesn't have to at this point in the process. It's still April.
Okay.
You really, again, your key step, your key dates, you're still at June 2nd, and that's still only a tentative budget. Nothing really happens until August. So we have the time to keep going. I just wanted to make sure, again, the templates, it's done. It's out there. It's ready to go. It's got to go to committees. It's got to go, there's a lot of information that has to be put together between now and August. But I wanted to make sure, one, that we had the templates out, and two, we had some kind of idea of what it would take to get us to those dates. And if we push some of them back a little bit, we're okay, but you can see you can't push it back too much.
Yeah.
Because you certainly want to have your discussions done before June 2nd so that you're okay with your high water mark.
On the 21st, how long do you project that we're going to be involved with you on that day?
I would guess on the 21st, not a lot, because
Okay.
it's going to be very tight to get the budget to you. It'll be more like, here's our budget, and give you broad strokes on what it looks like. And then, based on that, really the key would be to schedule the workshops on the 21st.
Okay.
As far as like the other funds, like the Stony Brook and Town Lakes and Pelican Preserve, when are you expecting for them to get you a preliminary budget?
I'm going to actually I'm going to ask that question to them.
Okay.
Yeah, I started that. I have the templates ready. I've got to communicate with them and find out from them and have it come back, because I can certainly put together a preliminary as well. And again, but it'll just be preliminary, and it'll still give them time to have their meetings, because they'll have several meetings. Again, this is the schedule we followed last year, and it worked. It's just very tight. At least the top half is tight to get the first draft. After that, there is a lot of time in between.
Okay.
Fine, okay. That's good. We do have other questions.
Yeah, why did,
Chief?
Nancy brought up the topic, and I think we should have the explanation.
Do you want to do that during financials or now?
I'll let Bill decide.
Let's do it in financials.
Okay, only because there are schedules that I can
That's
refer
right.
to.
Exactly.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
May we proceed to staff reports?
Yes,
District
sir.
Council, you're up.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry,
Excuse me one second.
did I miss something?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on just one second, Mr. Paris. Yes, please.
I just wanted to be absolutely sure on the revision of the insurance policy for the waiting period. Did we remove that, so we don't want to make that revision?
We are making that revision.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure, because I didn't hear a motion.
now?
The revision is effective now.
And I'm gonna
And
bring it
it is
back to
gonna
you
put
in the
in,
HR
it's
meeting.
gonna be put in the revision of the handbook, which will be coming back to us very
Okay,
shortly.
I wanted to be sure, we had a
I know.
communication issue.
Me too.
Thank you. Mr. Perez.
Yes, sir. The first item is more informational to the board, to keep the board apprised of the issue involving the Hammock Cove and South Florida Water Management District, the notice of violation. And again, if you recall, that's the project where it's next to Wetlands 48. The developer, in the course of his activities, L. Harris, noticed that there were failing silt barriers causing sediment and turbid water to enter the wetlands. And then South Florida came out and then issued a notice of violation. The developer has reported that they're going to remedy it. And if you notice that March 21st, L and Tyler went out there as to the status. And the district staff will just continue monitoring, report back at the next board meeting, and when we think it's appropriate to bring back that utilities conveyance to the board, we will. This is more just an update, so the board's apprised.
No action on our part
No,
at
sir.
this time.
And I don't know if Danny has anything to add to it. Once again, just informational. But these are the kind of things I think it's helpful for the board to understand what's going on out there.
Thank you.
The next item is an outline of a potential litigation, or initially a request for direct authorization to initiate mediation pursuant with Mass Tech and WSP with regards to a breach of the district's force main that occurred back in October of last year, where the district incurred expenses of almost $12,000 that all the parties and their carriers are refusing to pay, pointing the finger at the district. And based upon the information and evidence that we've determined to date, we believe that the other parties have the exposure and liability. Again, if litigation were to ensue, discovery ensues, different set of facts may come out. But because the uncertainty in litigation and the cost involved, we believe it's appropriate to request initially authorization to try to engage in mediation. If that fails, then you can file a county court action, a circuit court action to recover as much of the money as possible. Again, it's almost $12,000. And we always look at litigation for cost-benefit analysis. And with any litigation, there's no certainty of litigation. We've had this fun experience with insurance carriers, attorneys lately, where for amounts under $15,000, they will just drive and drive and drive the cost up to where the cost of litigation exceeds the cost of the item, at issue. So we at least recommend starting the first step, seeing if they mediate. Report back to the board.
How did they figure that we have a cause?
They're citing Terry Hanlon being on site directing where to drill the hole.
Yeah, as opposed to where our position is, Terry did the locates as appropriate, required under state statute, 24 inches offset from the district's lines. Terry apparently also showed them a map showing where the district's lines were. The carrier and/or the contractors or subcontractors are saying that our district staff told them exactly where to bore. And we're saying, no, we identified, we did the locates.
Tony, I've got a few questions.
Yes, sir.
After you.
Please, go ahead.
I've read this with quite a lot of interest, Tony. I'm interested in these kind of things. Here's the way I see it. WSP with a sub to Mastec.
That's correct.
Okay, they're the proximate cause. They're the ones who drill the hole.
They're the entity that engaged in the activity, they're
Right. That's where the
employees.
negligence needs to be proved.
Well, it's the contractor and the
Proximate cause.
subcontractor, that's correct.
So now, apparently this occurred on October 23rd, which
Yes.
is a Friday, I found out. Do you know what time of day it occurred? Because I don't find that in the meeting book.
I don't have that material.
Maybe Cal knows that. Do you remember what time of day this happened on October 23rd, this wastewater leak on Griffin?
I don't know.
Was it in the daytime or in the night?
It was daytime, I had the locates
Yeah.
information too, but not with me.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out if there's some substance in them saying that Terry Hanlon was on site. Was Ivan on site, or was Scott on site, or was
Scott would have been on site.
Well, once again, even if Terry was on site, our understanding is that he just was there to place the locates, locate the lines and identify it with paint.
I understand from the meeting book, Tony, that there were some documents provided to WSP to show them where the where the sewer lines were located, but they're making out that that Terry was telling them, directing
The
them.
exact point where, no, once again, my understanding is, the information to date is that District Staff Terry located the lines as per the statute and marked the locates with paint within 2 feet of the lines as required. And then he had a map that said, again, these are the lines, but put the locate on the ground.
Right. Were
And
these
did not
lines-
tell them, and my understanding is Terry did not tell them where to dig, just that this is where the lines are located.
And do we know if the lines were in the correct place?
My understanding is yes, they were within the right of way, which is a utility easement.
And now WSP's insurance company is saying they don't do no-fault insurance, they got to prove negligence for them to pay up.
Yep.
What about our insurance? Have we considered, when do we ever make a claim?
For some other
For
parties'
something like-
negligence?
Rather than litigating, what about going after our insurance company to pay up for this?
I don't know what our deductible is for a claim like this. 2,500?
Wouldn't it be better to ask them to pay?
For someone else's negligence?
Well, we
Okay.
haven't proved that yet.
Yeah,
Rather than is the mediation binding?
no.
So we're still not.
If you want to make once again, notify our carrier and see if they'd pay the claim, and then and if they thought it was a worthwhile claim and paid it, they'd be subrogated to our position, they would feel whether they need to go after the other parties.
What's our annual insurance premium, Cal?
Well, it's, a lot.
Yeah, isn't it time that we made a claim in situations like this, rather than going straight to litigation every time?
We could check it out.
I'd request that at least, Mr. Chairman.
That's probably a good suggestion. However, if one insurance company is gonna deny it, the chances are that the other one will too.
The
but
difference
that-
is that our insurance company wants to keep insuring us.
I understand. I understand that. Other board members have comments on this?
Well, I think the request here is to go to mediation. I don't think we really have anything to lose by going to mediation.
But I think based upon the conversation today, perhaps we can again continue this to the next board meeting to see what the result is from following through if the board wishes a claim to be made with the district's carrier.
We can't require anybody to go to mediation.
That's correct, it's voluntary.
There is one more point, Tony, and that is if it gets down to the wire on this thing, WSP, a fiber optic company located locally, we may be able to get something in kind, because we need some fiber optic work doing. I mean, anything's better than litigation.
I don't disagree in this case,
It's
especially.
basically litigation that you lose.
Well, especially in this case, and once again, you do the whole cost-benefit analysis, and maybe that's what they're figuring also, quite frankly.
Okay.
But of course, you didn't forecast that we would lose, Bill,
I did not.
No.
I'd never do that,
in a public venue.
especially when the cameras are grinding.
Exactamundo.
If I can be of any help with that stuff.
Is that okay with everybody that we postpone any
Yeah.
further decision,
Understand.
letting the council?
And there were the Cal
Yeah,
contact the carrier.
I think going to getting information from our insurer will also give us could give us legs towards mediation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, nothing further.
Do you have other items for
No,
us,
sir.
Mr. Attorney?
sir.
Car insurance is,
District Engineer, Danny?
For the record, Danny Nelson with Tetra Tech, and I'm going to apologize for this. I would have had this on the agenda, but this is a development that's kind of taken place this week regarding SRF. Nothing bad, but I just want to give an update. So I will. I'll pass the handout.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're working, and I think actually we now have a draft of the facilities plan. We had a conversation with Stephen. I think we're able to address financial as well as the technical. So our goal is to get something in district's hand tomorrow. I actually went through the document today. But what we had a conversation with DEP, and originally we were looking to shoot for around the first meeting in June to bring the facilities plan to the board for approval to get into DEP. Their suggestion is to do that sooner, and the reason is they've now set their date for their public hearing, their next public hearing. They have 2 to 3 public hearings a year. There's always one in February, and there's always one either in July, August, or September. And they've set that date, as you'll see on here, as August 10th. That's the next to last item on the top, public hearing for determination of funding list. So the steps that have to take place before that are you have to have the facilities plan completed. It has to be advertised for a public meeting. So you would do that at a regularly scheduled board meeting. The difference would be there would have to be a specific advertisement for that item, because that advertisement has to go into DEP, just part of their checklist. Following that presentation and public participation, there would need to be a resolution by the board to basically adopt and accept that facilities plan. That facilities plan would then go into to FDEP. Then what we would do is complete the design documents. They would be combined. Well, sorry. That facilities plan will be reviewed by DEP as well as other state agencies through what they call the clearinghouse process, where any state agency that might have interest in the project would have to review it and then either say, yes, we accept this, or no, we have questions, and they would essentially ultimately reach approval, and that allows you to then enter the loan process and the plan approval process. So essentially this timeline is just laying out what we're envisioning. So we would like to have that set for the second meeting in May. So that basically gives us all of this month to do draft reviews, and then to make modifications, and then ultimately bring that to the board. In addition to that, this board had asked, I believe maybe 2 meetings ago, regarding this process and the administrative side of bringing Corbett Allday back to talk about what his potential participation and the steps, because we can handle a lot of the technical, but when it gets into that administrative side, we would be fumbling through. So this board had asked about inviting Corbett back. I've called and emailed and finally was able to reach Corbett this morning or yesterday, and he's available on the 5th. So I would actually like to bring back on the 5th, not only for Corbett, but to discuss anything about this process. So including where the pond bank restoration design and current efforts are going on, and ultimately this process for SRF. So again, I apologize for not having this in the agenda packet, but this was development that just happened this week. So if you have any questions.
Please.
Danny, thank you for this. What I think I'm hearing from residents is they're looking to see some kind of a plan. They want to see, like we heard earlier today, when is my lake going to be done? The questions like that I'm getting, okay? Does this facilities plan include a lake-by-lake timelines, weather permitting, water levels permitting?
No, and specifically no, because what you don't want to do is pin yourself into a corner where you're committed to DEP to doing things in a specific order. What we do is we individualize each lake, where we have a map showing each lake and the extents of work to be done, and then we have a general schedule that it's a 5-year program, you're going to do this many and this amount. So we specifically did that, but as we review the draft, if we want to get more specific, we can. I'm just leery of getting too specific for that reason, that, if somebody's checking the boxes and they're looking at this and they're coming out and doing inspections, and because we know that lakes that we would say today are of priority, are not necessarily the same lakes that were priority 2 years ago, and not necessarily the ones that'll be there in 2 years from now.
Got it. So that you're gonna, this encompasses a prioritization phases, like 1, 2, and 3, rather like the Morris Riley thing.
Yes.
Presumably it won't be that different from Morris Riley, no. But that's as far as you're going, to take it to
Specifically.
priority levels.
Yes.
That's about it.
Trying to keep it as generic as we can, but still identifying the specific lakes, showing the boundary and everything else. So specifically for that reason, though.
And Corbett Day did say when he was at the podium that it could probably get us something close to zero interest. SRF loan, that'd be a hell of a good reason to bring him back to see whether he's still in that position.
Yes, and I think where his services can come into play with that is helping to describe the steps that you have to take to get to that point, because it does come with a cost.
Okay.
And because some of that, for instance, Buy American is one item that you can add. So, and in fact, I have a project right now. It's about a $6 million item, and the Buy American will add about $400,000 to the cost. Well, you can do the math on the interest and realize it's probably not a good idea. So you just kind of need to think. I don't think we're really dealing with, material that's that outrageously expensive, but.
Thank you.
Other questions for Danny? Do you have anything else for us?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. District Manager?
Yes, I've just got one thing I wanted to update the board on, filling the utility manager's position. And as I had indicated, we narrowed our search down to one, which we were going through the vetting process. And unfortunately, his resume was shared, and that the resident took it upon himself to contact his current employer to discuss it with them before he could discuss it with his employer. And so he withdrew his application, and that's forced us to go ahead and start all over. And we are re-advertising. We have 10 applications. 5 of the 10 so far are worthy of consideration. And the 5 all have at least a bachelor's degree with water sewer experience. I just got one who was sitting here, so that's 6 with water sewer experience and a degree, and 2 are engineers. I understand that some of the discussion with the employer was really for a position different than what we were advertising. It was as an operations manager, and I guess I would like to know from the board, are we searching for something other than a utilities manager, which the current job description has? If so, I need to shift directions, and if the search isn't going in the direction that the board wants, then I'd rather just turn it over to somebody else and let you proceed.
Why would you even make that kind of an assumption? What have we done that makes you think that we do not want a utility manager?
Okay.
How was the resume shared? How did it end up with a resident, and then this resident took it upon themselves to call? I mean, who shared the resume with whom? That's what I'd like to know.
I can't answer that.
I can answer that. I can tell you what happened if you really want to get into it, do you?
Darn right, I wanna
Yeah,
get
I
into it.
do.
I'm mad as a wet
Okay.
hen about the whole darn thing.
Okay, well, let's try and just get some facts.
Just a minute, get the
Margaret-
gloves.
Margaret's asked the question, and I'll answer it. What transpired, Carl, is that you sent a message to the board members saying that you're ready to make an offer to this individual. Here's his credentials. You want some feedback. Okay, do you remember that email? You asked the board members for some feedback before you made an offer.
I don't think it was quite like that, but.
Okay, well, how was it then?
What was it? Yeah, it was, basically, we were, at a point where we're gonna start discussing the employment of this individual.
Let me jump in here. If the defense mechanism is to put him on the spot, to to justify the fact that somebody that isn't on the board or a part of the hired community of the CDD was then asked by somebody else to get involved, I think that alone is something that steps over the line, way across the line.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's go further. The request from you was to get board input before you made an offer to this individual. You sent us an attachment which was Mr. Taylor's credentials.
I think the key here is board input. So that fact that this was given to a resident, and I'd like to know who that was,
I'm gonna-
because they tanked our ability
I'm
to
going to-
hire a good employee.
Okay. Margaret, I'm going to answer your question, because that's what you've asked, and I shall answer it. I'm trying to give you an archive as to what occurred. Is that you asked the board for some comments before you went ahead and made an offer. If you'd like to just spend a minute looking for that email, that would be great.
That's what I'm doing now. I
Thank you.
think it was different than input. It's just that what
Okay.
we were going to go ahead and proceed unless the board felt something different, or we ought to take a different direction.
Please just find the email and let's get it on the table.
So how did we get from a board member having input to a resident having input?
I'm going to come to that. I'm just asking for justification for this email that he's looking for, and I don't want to push him.
I guess because of the way you're phrasing this, I can assume that you're the one that gave this individual's resume to a resident in the
Well,
community.
You're pushing me, and I don't want to be pushed, but let's do this in stages.
It won't go back that far.
Okay,
Yeah,
so,
if you got it, that would be great.
Well, I'll find it.
Danny has it.
Okay, it says, after a lengthy search for a new utility manager, we, Danny Tyler, April, and myself have all agreed upon the best candidate to extend an offer to. I'll initiate the negotiations with this candidate, which will include drug testing and a background check next week. The candidate we'll be expending an offer to is the individual that was selected, and I can attach a copy of his resume for your review. And unless I hear objections from the supervisors, I'll extend an offer next week. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was trying to say, is that you sent that out and asked us for some input.
Objections.
Okay,
Okay.
input, objections, whatever. And that was a reasonable email to send. My comment at that point was, how private is this? Is this a public record? I wrote to Tony, I copied you, and I asked Tony, is this candidate's credentials a matter of public record, or is it private? Because it was understood that he was trying to keep that from his employer until such a time as an offer had been made. I think that's what I learned from you. I asked Tony if he was a public record, and Tony gave me an answer back saying that it was a public record.
Subject to redaction for information that's otherwise exempt,
Okay.
but it is a public record.
Now, I was doing my due diligence to find out how private this was to board members, or was it in fact something the Gateway Sun could ask for example, or anyone else for that matter. At that point, I then wanted to get another opinion. I asked a professional engineer who lives next door to me, Ed Tinkle, what he thought about Mr. Taylor's resume, because I wanted his input, because I respect it, knowing that it was a public record anyway. And as far as I'm concerned, I thought that was okay to get Ed's opinion. And that answers Margaret's question, who did that and why I did it? Because I wanted some feedback from somebody else other than Tyler and Danny, and I respect that feedback that I got. What Ed did with it is a matter for Ed. That's why I did it.
And I think it was totally out of line to take that outside the realm of this board.
You're entitled to your opinion, Bill.
Thank you.
But it's a public record.
Well,
don't
I think
care
we
if
need
it's
to
a
put
public record
something.
or not.
I don't
You-
care, I-
You wrecked our
I don't care,
record.
I don't care whether you care or not.
I don't care whether, you don't care if I care or not. You wrecked our
No, I didn't.
chance of having
If it
a
was-
good employee.
If it, well, that remains to be seen, and we'll never will know. Okay, Margaret, did I answer your question?
You did. I guess my next question is for Ed. Why in the world, knowing that we were going to hire this individual or approach him or thinking about it, what made you think that it would be a good idea to contact his current employer?
Thank you. Do you know anything about engineering? You know anything about professional
I-
engineers,
I've
ethics?
been-
I
I've
ask you a
been
question.
raised
Do you know
around-
anything about
No,
engineers?
you
code?
answer her question.
I asked the question,
No,
Bill.
she asked the question.
Yes,
of
I
you.
know that, and here's what happened. I contacted, because I read the resume, and this guy is not the guy you're looking for. To even prove that, and Cal, watch the ground you tread on. Watch the ground you tread on.
Are you gonna
Yes.
answer the question or
I'm
not?
going to answer the question. Yes, I contacted Rick Brylansky. Now, for the record, Rick Brylansky never contacted the employee. So where did this come from? Somebody manufactured why he quit. Cal had to have talked to somebody. I think what you did is you spooked the daylights out of this kid when you called him back and told him this was a public record. Rick Brylansky is ready to take a phone call right now and tell every one of you, he did not make any contact with that employee whatsoever. And furthermore,
And furthermore, you haven't answered
and
Margaret's
furthermore,
question at
hold
all.
on, Bill, you're gonna have a heart attack. Number one is that Rick Brylansky said, this is not the candidate you want.
And what business do you have contacting
Let me
anybody?
think. Let's get past the public record. Tony, is it a public record? Is this document a public record?
What business do you have contacting?
I live
anybody?
here, Bill, and I'm a resident. I
Okay.
can ask any question I want as long as it's not violating a public record.
Folks, I don't know if anybody else is feeling a little bit like this has gone too far.
It is. It's gone way too far. The answer is, Gary, you hit the nail on the head. The issue is the boss of the guy, Rick Brylansky, never contacted the employee.
Okay, so-
The employee had no contact whatsoever that this conversation went on between me and Rick.
Okay.
So that raises a question. How,
It
what happened?
answers-
I think the answer is the
answers
question,
the
Bill.
question of what business
Bill, it
do you
answers
have?
the question, the kid, you spooked him, and he didn't want the job.
All right.
Okay,
so-
let's
That's
let
what you did.
Gary, can we let Gary complete what he was
Can we
going to
stop
say,
a minute?
please?
And I also have another comment, because I'm not trying to point fingers, but Ed, my concern is that.
Go ahead and point 'em.
I don't want it to be that
That's-
every time we're going to hire somebody, one of our residents contacts their current employer and asks
If
about
you
it.
do your due diligence, Margaret, you're going to check background before you make an offer.
Of course.
You didn't do it. You were going to make an offer and check background after the fact. That is insane. I've never heard of such a thing.
I don't know that
Could
that's
I-
necessarily true.
That's
but-
what we're doing.
We're back and forth again.
Okay, Mr.
All
Tinkle,
right.
please sit down.
No, wait a while. Hold on.
No, no, we're-
Let's bring it down. One of the things, let me divert this thing. Can we imagine for any position now, after this has happened, that a person actually tries to get gainful employment here, knowing full well that this is something where their employer can be contacted while they're in the process of trying to change employment? I'm not trying to do this as a finding fault situation, I'm just trying to open this discussion up a bit. And I know that for me, or for any of us, if we were going after employment, I'd almost say to myself, there is no way in heck that I'm going after anything that's governmental,
That's a problem, Gary.
you know?
That's a problem.
This was an eye-opener in this particular case for me. And I would say that, wow, I wonder who's gonna actually, other than somebody that isn't employed, gonna apply for the job. You know, and not even talking about the qualifications thing, the due diligence, okay? So I would say that we have a limited type of situation that's here, just something that I want everybody to kind of think about. I think that regarding the due diligence, excuse me, I've got this sinus infection. I want to bring this around to the fact of why wouldn't Danny and Tyler, who we've hired with full confidence, and we've had exposure to them for a number of years, and this is just a question not for argument. Is there something that you see, Ed, with your engineering background too, that they couldn't have done a similar thing? Because I'm not an engineer, drive a great airplane, but I'm not an engineer. Cal isn't an engineer, nor any of the rest of us.
I don't know what leeway they were given, Gary, but I can take and.
I don't know.
The-
But
the question
I
I-
would think that we should, in this particular case, they would be the applicable person. And I'm tossing this to Danny and to you. So Danny, I want you to not keep looking down at your fingers. I want you to get involved in this. Give me some comments here, will you please?
Well, to the degree that it's appropriate, I really don't even want to go there. But I've been fortunate that my entire career has been with one company, and we have an HR department. So, you know, they guide the path of everything when we're doing hiring. You know, we participated in interviews. The individuals were vetted, and we participated in interviews. If direction is because of our expertise that we take more of a role in the next grouping, at the board's discretion. I personally am not a fan of contacting employers without at least talking to the applicant first. But you know, one thing that you could ask for if it's re-advertised again is, you know, or references upon request. And if they're in our industry, and they're local, I would know them anyhow.
Okay.
If they're in our industry and they're not local, we can certainly talk to clients, other methods, at least initially, without going directly to an employer. So there are ways of, you know,
Okay.
doing that.
So my question would be, and I'm gonna divert to Pam, but I just have two questions. Would the rest of the board support the fact that in the next hiring type of situation, that the interviews should be done by Danny and or Tyler? And secondly is the fact of.
Wait a minute. Are you excluding Cal and or April?
No,
Oh.
no. But I think in this particular case, that not, you know, if you wanna find out about great real estate, call me, but that's not my thing. So I'm saying that that's Danny's field of dreams, that's his expertise, that's the level of confidence that we placed in he and Tyler, because that's why we hired them.
So Danny only went to one meeting.
Well, Danny did
What I'm saying
interview,
is-
I think he didn't he?
Interviewed
Okay.
the
He did interview the applicant, but my thing to Tony is that is every government entity, is this the way every government entity works? That everybody who applies or works with a government entity is subject to having their information public, and do residents go and directly to their employer? Is it something that,
Subject to exemptions in the public records law that may be applicable to any specific agency, the application for employment with a governmental body in the state of Florida is a public record, and it's not exempt from the public records law. There might be information contained within that application that might be confidential and exempt, like social security numbers and other information. But an application and a resume are public records. And again, the only way it would not be sent to somebody outside the staff or the board would be if there wasn't an exemption in the statute. And again, there are none, except for like personal information such as social security numbers and items like that. There are some, and Cal and I have had this conversation, there are some headhunting firms that specialize in government hirings around the state. It's interesting, if you look at their website, on some of the listings for some of the job applications for governmental entities, some of them say just to let you know, once your application is received, it becomes a public record or subject to public disclosure. Some of the information sheets did not have that. So that's just, once again, I don't know what the hiring procedures or practices are generally around the state, but the public records law,
Okay.
and the way it's been construed is the applications for employment, unless there's a specific statutory exemption, and I did not see one in this instance, they are public records, not exempt or confidential, although some
And-
information may be.
But that
Okay,
begs
so
the
being
question.
being a public record, is there liability for someone who would be a resident to contact this person's the person's employer?
The district, once somebody has a public record and they choose to make other requests or make contacts, the district, in my opinion, has no exposure or liability for that. That's individuals.
Would Ed have
unilateral action.
liability because he's not with the district?
I can't talk to anybody else's liability. My guidance is to the board, so
Well, I've gone a step further than this.
Well,
Talk to an attorney.
Excuse me.
Here's what I'd like to
The-
do.
this is my thing. I think, and is there something in place that a person or a resident can use when they want to request
Yes,
information?
yes, they file a
Public
request,
information
public
request.
information request, and then it's handled in a professional legal process.
I presume.
Was that request filed
No.
by Ed Tinkle?
I presume the Gateway Sun and people like that make these public records requests all the time to get them to publish what they publish, right? I've contacted Florida Association of Special Districts on this, Joe DeCervo, and as far as he's concerned, we operate in a goldfish bowl. You know, when someone applies for a job, this is a public record, and all of the experiences he's had on FASD, he's on the board at FASD, there isn't such a thing as a private application.
It is not ethical to go to someone's employer. You know what, I think we hired a district manager. I'm sorry, but I was
haven't
talking
finished.
first, and you interrupted.
Carry on.
We hired a district manager to do a job. And Ed, you know, I know your concerns, but I think that you should have brought your concerns back to the board or to Severn Trent, not to go to this man's employer.
You have your
You
opinion,
cannot tell an employer when to check references. There is no time limit. I don't want to hear about what engineers do. There is not a time limit on when an employer can check references. There are employers that check references before they make an offer, at the time they make an offer, and 30 days after they make offers. So that is a chance that the employee takes. I think that you have possibly put yourself in a liable situation. If this happened and a person lost their job because you went to their employer prior to them going to their employer, they could well have a suit against you.
Well, can I take that as a legal opinion?
We,
Well,
Pam,
It's my
Pam, I've
opinion,
checked,
in my
believe me, I
opinion.
checked this. I do not have any exposure. The one you guys better be thinking about more than anything, why don't one of you, Cal, why don't you call this individual and simply ask them what was the reason they dropped out? It wasn't that their boss knew. They don't know anything about it. The boss never said a word to that employee.
The boss went on vacation, and now the employee is.
I've talked to
is
the boss.
threatened.
The
I know,
the
he
boss
went
is,
on
the
vacation
boss
the
is
next
ready to
day.
come in here and tell you what happened. One, he said that the individual was not the person for this job, which was my opinion when I read it the first time.
But it's not
As an
your-
engineer,
it's not
as
your
a citizen,
right to
yes, it
make
is, Bill.
a judgment
As
on
a
that.
resident, it is
not.
mine.
That's
Yes, it
what
is.
this board's for.
You can do yours, but so can I. I'll do my due diligence, you do yours.
okay.
Well, I'm glad that you got that on the record.
Thank you.
But you still have the situation now that you've got this going on right this minute, and that isn't helping anything. So-
Gary, you've got several individuals that have applied, so I think that shows that the door It is open.
Yeah,
But
Let me-
but
let
the
me-
next time
the
that
woman-
somebody, the next time that somebody
Do
hears
you know my
we've made a
ex-wife? She used to
decision-
interrupt too. She's
Just do,
gone.
Margaret,
If we've
just
got 10 more
do
people.
your due diligence.
I understand, Ed, but is this, our understanding is that if we pick another candidate, that as soon as you hear about it, you're gonna call their employer? Because that concerns me.
If
It's
you're
one
not checking
thing-
the employer to begin with, you're making a mistake.
Can I
If it's-
just finish before I was politely interrupted? I think that on a positive thing, if we, the board, direct the fact that, at least for this next position, we want Danny directly involved. Danny and Cal, April, whoever, but Danny, because this is an engineering type of thing, directly involved, to try to get a better direction, communicate that better direction, and we can keep beating this till the cows come home. It's over and done with.
But I think we had Danny, we had,
I was
We
trying to
did- we
say
had
something.
Danny
Hang on, I'm saying it's
involved.
Hold on just
more.
a second.
More.
we had,
We're gonna let the ladies talk first.
well, I just don't understand, you know, we had Danny and who else involved? And Tyler involved. So more meaning what? And I think the bigger issue is not whether they're involved or the amount of time they're involved. The bigger issue is when we, or when Severn Trent or Danny, whoever settles, because they settled on an applicant. Are we going to have residents, because that is the problem, that's the issue.
Kiddo.
Do we have residents that are going to their employers and asking the employers directly for?
And the answer has already been given. You can't stop a person once they have public information, short of trying to threaten Ed, which.
I'm not
how-
trying to threaten
well,
Ed.
How else are you going to try to wrap your arms around Ed?
Okay,
Come on.
okay.
I just want to make one point, and I understand you're wanting to get an opinion on a resume. And that opinion given to him, I don't have a problem with. What I had a problem with is that this guy's employer was contacted that could cause him a lot of heartache and heartburn.
Didn't happen.
To say
But-
nothing of us.
Didn't
I'm just
happen.
saying- I'm just saying, could have, and that's my concern, is that every time we have an applicant that we wanna hire for something, somebody's gonna step beyond us and go to their employer.
Until you brought this up, it wasn't public. Till you brought this up, people, this wasn't public. You brought it public. The employee knew nothing that his employer knew it. You people just made it public.
That is just about the most ridiculous thing I've heard this year.
All right, boys and girls, we've
Really?
crossed the line of sanity. Let's press on.
I would like to, I was trying to say something earlier, and I feel I need to finish.
All right, please, finish.
That when someone applies for a job in any public entity, and that's been confirmed by FASD, and I've also spoken to Lee County, Margaret, they have to be aware that whatever they send, other than private information, like Tony's talking about, social security number, is a public record. I'm not sure people know that, but it is. And anyone, including local media, can make a public records request. It's not, Cal was making the point that this individual preferred not to speak to his employer until he received a verbal or written offer. And I spoke to Joe DeSerbo about that process. His opinion, hang on, Bill, let me finish. Joe's opinion was he would not touch anyone with a barge pole that wants to conceal someone in a public position. This is a public entity, not a private, where they want to conceal from their employer of 15 years the fact that they've applied to a public entity. He said he wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. This is a public record. His employer should know. A professional engineer should at least have a good enough relationship with his employer to let them know that he's applied to a public entity.
There was never going to be, you've got this job, we just want to check with your employer. We were vetting the employee. I called the employee and I said, listen, we're ready to take the next step, but I need to talk to your employer. Do we have the right to talk to your employer? I'm not going to talk to anyone's employer unless the employee knows it. That's just common courtesy.
The employee needed to know that this was a public record, and I don't think he probably did.
The
But
fact that
don't
it's a
you think-
public record does not mean that he expects that some resident is gonna go messing around with his employer.
Well, the question that Gary's raised is valid, going forward. We have a guy here who lives in Gateway, who's been a professional engineer all his life. Danny and Tyler do not live in Gateway. Why not involve Ed in the selection process?
Because he's proven to me that he can't stand to
Well,
do
it's
it.
proven to you that, but you're only one person on the board, Bill.
And I, well, listen to the rest of them, I agree with me.
I don't see why we're hiring an engineer, why we can't get a resident who attends almost every board meeting, who's been a professional all his life.
Oh,
Can't
yada,
be asked for
yada,
his-
yada, come on. He's proven to us that he doesn't have what it takes to do that.
Well, I
We've got
don't
it-
agree, I
we've
don't
got-
agree with you.
Well, I don't agree with you.
That's fine.
Guess we'll wait till November 8th, guys.
Why don't you sit down?
Is that in order?
Hey, Ed,
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary.
Danny, I think probably everybody here would like you to be, as much as you obviously may not feel that way, would probably like you to be a little bit more involved. next time.
And I appreciate that. I just want to, clarify how the previous process, it was board's request.
Hey, I'm not complaining about what it was, I'm just simply saying because of the obvious emotions that have been displayed here publicly, that,
It's entertaining.
it might be helpful if you did.
Okay.
Okay.
The board want to go on to the financial statements.
Yes.
Where's Stephen? Did he run home yet?
Thank you, Stephen.
Hey, so what did you do to Pelican Reserve, Stephen?
Um,
You didn't follow instructions whatsoever.
Apparently, I did not follow instructions.
All right.
Well, let me explain that further, and
Please.
not to make light of it. I did attend a Pelican Preserve meeting and laid out some general thoughts on how to invest. After the meeting, I went back and prepared a more detailed schedule and forwarded that out to the treasurer. And I thought that was going to be communicated to the board.
Is that Ms. Cascio?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's where my fault lies. I did not follow up to make sure that that been communicated properly. Because what I had done is, in looking at the cash, and as in combination with the requirements, there was a lot more to invest than initially determined. And if we had invested a smaller amount, they would never get to where they'd be in a good situation, and they'd be losing out on a lot of potential interest.
Okay.
And the rates were very good
Okay.
at the time. So I need to do a better job of communicating back and forth what I'm going to be doing. But, nothing that we've done has any problems with liquidity, and the exact opposite is we need to do some more,
Okay. All right,
so.
good. You okay?
Well, I think our intent was to take baby steps at first, not running out of the gate. And I think we've chatted a little bit, and so we need to understand a little bit more about which funds he's taking, whether we're taking reserves or out of
Okay.
budget
So,
funds. So
my thing again, it's communication,
Yes,
you know?
I think you
Okay.
and I are on that page.
Good, great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Would you just give us a quick review of the February financial statement?
Sure. You're through February, and I'm going to kind of switch here and get back to my other page. I'll start really with the general fund. And if you look at the general fund, right now you're about 94% collected in your assessments, which is very good. You can, I'm sorry, the page is 200 of the agenda package that I'm starting on. So you're 94%, very good. You've actually collected 175,000 more than last year at this time. Some of that is that your assessment went up, but again, the trends are showing a very good collection rate. Now, I won't go into a lot of the specifics about the spending, although we can talk about any of them that you want to.
What
But
statistically happens to the deficit side, for lack of a better term, I'm using deficit, the uncollected? What do we expect to happen with that, with the 6%?
in terms of how much of that will you collect and when?
Exactly.
What's going to happen now is that a little bit more will roll in, and then there could be a tax sale, but you probably won't get to 100%.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is that not this year, but in the past, you've had delinquent assessments roll through the following years. So, that obviously that liability doesn't go away. It's still attached to the property, but
Right.
I don't foresee you'll get 100%. And one of the other reasons is because things change, meaning that we get corrections and different things, errors and things that occur, when the property appraiser goes through things. So you probably won't get at 100%.
Okay.
You'll be close.
Okay, thank you.
Overall, this, spending is doing very well, and it's a little bit easier to see now with the capital project fund being separated out. So that does make it a lot easier to kind of see. Now, if you're looking just from a straight line perspective on where you are, you're about 42% through the budget cycle. Your spending right now is at 34%. So again, some of that is timing, with projects and stuff, but you can certainly see that there's, good trends in terms of where your spending is. Now, it doesn't mean that won't have to make some changes or keep looking at things, but, a lot of things are looking good in terms of your variances.
Is there a big expenditure that's in the wind that you know of that'll change that 34%?
The one that I'm looking at, I would say, is, let's see, really, we got $25,000 for the landscape architect. Nothing has been spent on that yet. At least nothing through February anyways. Nothing else really hasn't, that I can see right off the top of my head,
So
that
we're
would
in a
just
good
severely
position.
change that.
Okay, good.
Video inspection hasn't started, but that's only 10,000. Lake maintenance is still a little low, so I don't really see anything, big.
14 for GIS, is that in there too?
That is in your enterprise fund,
Okay.
and that's going to come out of your capital budget for that as well. Kind of moving to the Pelican Preserve Fund. Let me give you a page on that. Yep, it's 206. Now, of interest of note, and I guess it's not on the screen yet, basically, for Pelican Preserve,
Hey, Cal, could you get 206 up on the screen, please? Sorry.
the assessments, you're 100% collected for your, what I'll call general assessments for operations. You're 100% collected through HOA. There's only $64,000 of total assessments for the whole Pelican Preserve Fund that's left to be collected.
$64.
64,000.
No, 64.
But it's still very good to see that. And the way we filter that is we, the reserve is the last thing that gets allocated towards, because obviously you want to make sure you got enough for operations and enough to cover your HOA responsibilities as well. Now, in terms of total spending, you're right on budget at about 41.5. The Pelican Preserve does have some spending in terms of project work that is a carryover from prior years. So their numbers are going to be a little bit different. And if you look at page 207, you can see it under pond aeration. They've got a $310,000 amount in there. And so their spending is going to be a little bit different in terms of trying to match it up against your budget. But any of that additional spending was the money that was approved to be carried forward from a prior year. But again, it really is the same trend when you look at it across the board. You don't have any significant variances through those general funds, and the numbers do look good. Let's take a look at the enterprise fund. And that's on 217. one of the things that I always look at when I take a look at the enterprise, I usually start with your water, irrigation, and sewer revenue to kind of see how it compares against last year. And when you look at that and you compare the variance at the last column there, through those three, you're about $100,000 favorable in revenue. And so again, some of that is going to be the rate increases.
Where is that, Stephen? I'm not seeing the 100.
It's the last column. It says variance against the prior year when you add up the first three numbers, 44 or 45,000, 1,900, and 58,000.
Understand.
Now, connection fees, you can see you've collected 233,000. That's always one of those things you're not going to know when you're going to get it, but that's always a nice little bit of money to have in there. So overall, the revenue is looking very good for the enterprise fund. Variances look good too. There are a couple. Computer support's a little bit high, but not by much. Let's see, maintenance and repairs. We've talked a little bit about some of those repairs that are unexpected that they've had to do. You get a big savings in your wastewater. And as a reminder, when we budget the wastewater contract, we budget at the worst case scenario. So that's why it is very favorable, but it's good to see that just through these first couple of months, you're 200,000 favorable in your contract there. And overall, everything does look good. Even with all of that, your total expenses are about 37% of budget. Well under your budget.
Do
And
you
that's-
think we need a rate study at all?
To be honest, you still have rate increases coming, meaning you've already got from your last one built in.
Okay.
I certainly think that you're going to have to do one.
When?
We've talked about this before. I would really like to see, just from if I was doing it, I'd like to see after all the new meters are put in, because that way you've got better data, because the data is going to drive most of that.
Okay.
And again, you've got that, and then obviously you've got new homes being built. There's a lot of things that are in flux.
Okay.
I'd be more concerned if you didn't have increases coming up.
Okay.
So you're still going to see more revenue.
How long do we have that increase profile?
That I'd have to check on for you.
Okay. Is it 2 years?
That was 3 years at least.
3? You think?
I'd have to. I know it's on the website. I just.
Okay, no, I'm confident in it. No
I think
problem.
is my recollection. Let me check.
And what we do, by the way, just to kind of follow up on that, as a requirement of our water loans, we have to do every year an update on that rate analysis that we have to provide. So we'll see some warning signs. And what I mean is that we've got to do 5-6 year projection out, building in the water rates, building in certain other parameters.
Okay,
So we'll see that coming up.
okay.
Any other questions?
I'm good.
Ron?
Stephen, thank you. Page 214,
214?
yes. This is the general fund. Right down at the bottom, we've got 255,000 being transferred to fixed asset reserve in this year's budget, right? We're transferring $255,000 to the fixed asset reserve for the general fund. That's in our approved budget.
Yes, it's just not going to show up on
Yeah,
that page.
Where is that number?
That's going to show up on,
It's on page 228.
it's going to show up under your capital plan.
Yeah, but why isn't it showing up on page 214 under financing sources?
I'd have to double check. I know we have it budgeted, and I know I put it into the capital plan.
Yeah, and that's just revenue coming in on the bottom of page 214.
I've got a similar question, Steve.
The 204 is where the 204 is what shows where it's budgeted.
Yeah, page 228 is specific. It shows the
No,
228.
No, 204 shows the transfer to fixed assets, 255, 144. And it's showing up there because that's where the assessment money will come in.
Right, but
And then it'll be transferred when the actual comes in.
okay, then it goes to capital.
And normally we don't transfer it to the end of the year.
Right.
Just in case, I mean, I don't expect anything to happen, but just in case, you know, the board would have the option if they needed it for something else in case of emergency. We
Okay.
don't normally see that, but
I've got a related question to page 215, which is the enterprise fund capital fund. And there's a figure of 271,000 that we're putting in this approved budget for 16. And that's a related question. Where is that 271,000? When's that going to appear in the capital projects fund on the financing sources?
in terms of, it'll be the same scenario.
Same scenario?
Yeah.
Okay. That comes in later.
It comes in later, and that number really was just balanced out the budget. And I say that because it doesn't mean that more cannot be put in once we take a look at where we are at the end of the year.
Okay. That's all
Yeah,
I've
that,
got.
yeah, that's the bottom
Any more,
219.
Gary?
I'm good.
Pam?
I'm good.
Margaret?
Nothing.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
One thing I did want to mention, with Danny, we have been having our discussions about the capital financing package, and I believe at the next agenda, we're going to be including some of that, the data in our analysis for you. And part of what is going to be required is to show what's being pledged and where that fund money is coming from. So you'll be getting that, and we put together kind of a 5-year, I think, no, I'm sorry, 3 or 4 5-year plan as to how your general fund will look with this loan. So you'll be seeing that information, and then we can talk about it.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Will that be done on separate pages so we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? By any chance?
It's a 1-page form that they require.
Okay,
It fits on 1 page.
okay.
But it'll be separate, not buried in something, it'll just be.
Oh, yeah, it'll be a separate agenda item. Yes.
Okay.
Supervisor comments, Pam?
I have none.
Margaret?
None.
Rod?
Yes, one item. It appears that we have 10 meters, these new meters that have been stuck and have been reading 0. Do we have any recourse on the manufacturer for the parts, labour, or lost water revenue as a result?
I'd have to look at the contract, but I wasn't aware that we had 10.
Well, I think we need to at least have the new meters installed to replace those. We're supposed to have a functioning project, so, I mean, that's one thing, is that, those need to be changed out and meters provided.
Sure.
I'll check the contract to see if we can go after them for consequential damages, but at the minimum, as I understand the contract and scope of work, we need to have fully functional meters.
That's my request, if we can look at what.
I'll deal with
what the
Cindy on that and
consequences
Terry on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Gary?
I'm good. Well,
Could-
no. If Rod finds all this good information, who keeps giving this to Rod?
I keep phoning and finding it out, and because I put 40 hours a
Who do you
week in.
phone? Who do you phone?
All kinds
Ghostbusters?
of people, all kinds of people. I'm a mine of information because I work hard at it.
He's not saying that the rest of us don't.
I never said that.
Well, I was trying to defend
All
you.
I'm
I do
trying to
spend
say
40 hours
is,
a week on this.
whoever the person is that would've, it'd be nice to communicate it to everybody so that we weren't always kind of like a mushroom.
I make it my business to find out. I think it's important.
Well, that's, on
Gary-
on the other hand,
Gary, let's,
that's why we hire them. Thank you.
we ready to adjourn, ladies and gentlemen?
But real quick, just wanted to remind everyone on April 28th, the workshop, 10 to 2. And then
Good thing you
Mr.
did.
Senior won't be here for the 2 meetings in June, but we're gonna have Skype set up, and it'll be the first time that I think we get to do that.
No, we've done that before.
With Skype?
Yeah.
Oh, yes?
It didn't work
It
out
was
too
good.
well last year. It
Yeah.
didn't work out, but I think the new,
You kept breaking up. What are our dates for
well, you
May?
mean me
Or
personally?
meetings in May.
Yeah.
Do you know what our
It was the
dates are?
vendors. Don't go there.
The fifth was one of
Thank
them.
you, ladies and gentlemen.
I will
What
change.
time is our April 28th?
Yeah, we got our one dog Dixie,
10
drives me crazy.
Fifth and 17-year-old.
New trick.
Fifth and then-
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, my God. starting about
Because I'm
maybe a
going
year
out
ago,
of town.
she had
6.
She's having other issues.